Okay, hello everybody. Can I just check that you can hear me and see me all okay? If somebody could let me know, that would be awesome, because that way I know that all is working. And it's particularly useful if you can let me know today, because I am using a slightly different setup. So, thank you, Steve. Thank you, Nathalie. This is great. Great to know. Great to know that it's all working. And hopefully, it will all go smooth. And if it does, then this may be actually a better way forward. So I'm actually in a different machine, on a different environment today. I've brought you to my big computer. I have the camera on a tripod. You'd be surprised the crazy arrangement of furniture that I've just done in like the last hour and a half. Because I've been really afflicted with how Zoom has been behaving recently. And I've noticed that there are slightly different versions of Zoom depending on your machine, like Windows version, whatever. So, yeah, I've tried to use the most recent version of Zoom in the most up-to-date machine we have in the whole house, which is this. So I'm hoping that makes things better, but it could make them rubbish. Who knows? We're gonna try this anyway. And excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everybody, for letting me know, and welcome to the session on Velazquez today. I hope that you're all doing very, very well. We're about to get started in about a minute and a half. Welcome, Beth. Welcome, Raisa, Rosemary. Thank you so much for joining us, Steve. And thank you so much for the encouragement, Natalie. I'm glad to see it's working okay. The problem, though, is that, normally when I am on the laptop screen is here and the camera is here too. And that's not how the computer is set up right now, so I don't know where I'm looking, essentially. So I'm trying to look at the red circle that there is on my webcam, which hopefully means I am actually looking into you guys. But I'm a little bit discombobulated. Hey, Carol, hope you're doing really good. Thank you so much for joining us over here. Hope you're having a really good day. And hello, everybody that's just arriving into the chat room. We are about to get started in about a minute and a half. And a very quick disclaimer, I have tried to start our live stream onto YouTube twice today. For some reason, it doesn't seem to be working. I'm not entirely sure why. That seems to be a problem with the interface on YouTube. So yes, just keep that in mind. Unfortunately, it's not connecting well, or if it is connecting, it's not giving us signal here in the meeting itself. So just one of those it had to be one of those problems. Hi, Linda, thank you so much for joining us. Marina, yes, okay, so I'm glad to see that it is indeed not connecting properly. It did not come up with the normal screen, and I have reported the issue, but it's one of those ones that are unfortunately a little bit outside of our control, because, well, integrations between these platforms can be a bit tricky. Hi, how are you all doing? Thank you so much, Don, for joining us. Oh, thank you, Don. It's very kind. Excellent. Well, we're about to get started. I'm just waiting for my clock to properly tell me. I have an alarm that goes off to say, hey, tour time. So that is about to go off in just a second or two. Welcome, Ashrith. How are you doing? Hope you're having a good evening. And I hope that you're all having a very, very lovely week. This is actually my birthday week, by the way, so I'm very excited that we get to do Velazquez this time around, and that this Thursday, if you are joining me for that, it is our third lecture on England, on the English Academy with the Tudors. So if you're around for those, I'll be seeing you later. Hi, Marie. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much, Carol. Oh, thank you so much for joining us, Sonia. And my birthday is actually on Saturday, when I don't have any work to do apart from one tour in the morning. I've actually given myself most of the day off. So, thank you so much. Hi, Leandro. Thank you for joining us. Oh, wow, that's the birthday cake emoji is amazing. Whoever sent that, that's hardcore. Excellent. Welcome, like me. Thank you so much for joining us. But yeah, so feliz cumpleaños. Muchas gracias. Thank you so much, everybody. It's 33 years old. I'm gonna be this Saturday. So it's a big thing. It's a big thing for me because I don't like birthdays, but I'm actually trying to do something cool with my birthday this year. So thanks so much for your encouragement. And on that note, guys, it's actually time officially to get the tour started. So that means I need to close the chat. But don't worry, the chat will come back literally in a few moments at the end of the talk. And yeah, I certainly don't feel so young anymore. But that's just, I'm sure that's part of life. The older I'll get, maybe the younger I'll feel. I don't know, we shall see. So anyway, thanks so much everybody for joining us in here today. Before we get kick-started with Velazquez in our third session of the Academy of Baroque Masters, a very brief introduction. So in case you don't know me, my name is Dr. Lilian Céspedes González, and it is doctor because I have a PhD from the University of Winchester. And I've been pretty much ranting about art history for the best part of 15 years plus now. So thank you so much for giving me a chance to do this and for enjoying the academies. And specifically, thank you for suggesting this specific lecture today. I have been saying I was going to be doing Velazquez for nearly a year now, and today I'm finally delivering. And this is a very special session for me because, being Spanish, growing up surrounded with Velazquez's art, is no surprises that Velazquez is my favorite or one of my favorite artists. So it's very special for me to actually be able to share with you guys something that impacted me, not just growing up, but one of the reasons why I actually became a historian and an art historian in the first place. So we're going to be rolling with that. And as I'm bringing up the PowerPoint, I'm also just dropping into the chat the ways in which you can keep on supporting us here in World Virtual Tours through the Academy and all of the different talks and tours that we all do here. Remember that our project is solely funded by your donations, which you can do through PayPal and Stripe, and the link is right there. If at any point you have a problem with the links, either for PayPal and Stripe or for the upcoming tours, which is the second link in the chat, do let us know and we will, be on the case as soon as possible. And without any further ado, here I come to share my screen, and where hopefully everything is gonna be a-okay. Right, let's see. Brilliant. So screen is working. For those of you who are just arriving, I'm just trying a completely different new setup and a new computer. So this is all very new to me. So, okay, excellent. Let's get going and let's see if I can actually put my mouse and my keyboard in a place where it will not get in the way. Brilliant. Okay, well, here we go. So today we're starting with Velazquez, and I am of the opinion that before we talk properly speaking about the art, we need to talk about the artist first of all. So let's give you a little introduction to the life of Don Diego de Silva y Velázquez. Long Spanish name, of course, it had to be the way. Well, Don Diego, as we normally call him in Spanish, if it's not Velázquez himself, was actually born in June in 1599. We don't have an exact date for his birth. We just know that he was baptized on the 6th of June. And normally, just by proximity, baptism and birth tend to be a few days away from each other, at least in Spanish culture. So we reckon it was in the early stages of June in Seville. And Don Diego has a very modest upbringing, to be honest. He doesn't come into a family of, big money or anything like that. But it's very obvious from a very young age that he has a talent, and this talent must be harvested. So he actually becomes an apprentice very early on, at the age of literally just about 12 years old, with a very important studio master in Sevilla at the time, who is Francisco Pacheco. Now, Francisco Pacheco is a very well-known artist for us, not because he's a terribly good artist himself, because frankly, from the point of view of technique and, development, he's not that remarkable. But as a teacher, he's exceptional. So Velázquez goes studying with him, and he's going to actually sign a contract with Pacheco as an assistant in his studio for about 6 years. And that's when we reckon he properly breaks away and starts working on his own with his own work. Interestingly enough, the time in Pacheco's studio is going to be very useful for Velázquez and his development, even in his own personal life, since he actually ends up marrying one of the daughters of Pacheco. So, very much a family business in these regards. And the early career that he, begins as a master of his own right is still in Sevilla in 1618. And then something quite extraordinary happens. In the 1620s, pretty much because of the connections of his master, he's going to end up moving to Madrid, to the royal court, to become a court painter, which is quite a massive achievement, I must say, because that meant that Velázquez, for the vast majority of his lifetime as an artist, he's going to work under the direct patronage of the Spanish court, and often with the king himself. So imagine the profit and the great ability that that's going to give him to develop all kinds of projects on his own. Well, we know that at least at the very early stages of this career, Velázquez is going to be very heavily influenced by Caravaggio, which some of you have probably done a class with me already in him, and we're going to notice this impact as time goes on. And well, interestingly enough, and to confirm that Velázquez is really, lo mejor de lo mejor, the best of the best in Spanish, in 1627, the king himself is actually going to organize a competition to determine the best artist of Spain, and Velázquez wins. So, as you see, top-notch quality. At this moment in time, when he is in the court of King Felipe IV, Philip IV, he's also going to develop a relationship with Rubens, which perhaps you recall from a couple of weeks ago, since Rubens was actually, working in here in the court as, I'll say it, as a diplomat, essentially. And well, little by little, Velázquez's life continues to explore and develop. He's going to go on a very important tour of Italy at the end of the 1620s, from which he returned in 1630. And this tour of Italy is going to be very important for his development as an artist. It's going to be very influential, as you're going to see in a few minutes when we actually start looking at his art. And well, we know that as he returns back to Spain, to the court in Madrid, for the decade of the 1630s, he's going to be developing and working mostly on portraits, which is, one of the things that he's most famous for. But the height of his career is going to come almost towards the end of his lifetime. He really is the definition of that artist that the longer that they work, the better they get. And as such, the 1650s is really going to be his career zenith. And that is actually when he produces the very famous painting of Las Meninas, which is the magnum opus, and that we're going to be seeing today, of course, in this lecture. Well, not long after that, actually, in July 1660, Velázquez falls very ill with a nasty fever on July 31st. He seems to understand that this is pretty much the beginning of the end, signs his will, and a few days later, on the 6th of August, he dies in Madrid. Unfortunately for us, the burial place that he chooses is one of those churches that unfortunately gets very severely damaged and completely destroyed during the Spanish War of Independence or the Peninsular War, and therefore we don't actually have the final burial place of Velázquez within our heritage, which is, as a bit hurt as a sign of national pride for Spanish people, but sometimes these things happen, history just behaves the way it is. Now, we know that pretty much until the 19th century, Velázquez was not recognized properly as an artist outside of Spain. So his, talent as an international master comes a little bit later in comparison to many other great masters of art history. And that is in part because of the very history of Spain and the way our, art keeps itself within the empire. But throughout his career, we reckon Velázquez created between 110 to 120 different canvases, which is an awful amount of canvases for a man that lives, for 61 years. I mean, do the maths and realize how many pieces of art he was developing, per every 12 months. And, what Velázquez is really gonna become is the master of Baroque, but in a very individualistic sense, a little bit similar to Rubens in that case. They are gonna kind of, develop Baroque from very specific views. And that is what we're going to notice just in the art that we're going to see right now. So I'm just going to move the slide to a painting that, at least in Spanish history, is very famous, but I don't know if internationally for you guys it would be. So, you know, the way that I have chosen these paintings today is in chronological order, so we can follow the transition, but also in a way that we have the big important artwork alongside with bits that, at least from the point of view of Spanish people, are remarkable, and hopefully that will allow you to engage with that heritage better. So this is the Water Cellar of Seville, which is actually one of the most celebrated Bodegon paintings that not just Velazquez, but all of our Spanish painters created, really. And maybe right now I should explain what a Bodegon painting is. So bodegon is essentially the Spanish word for pantry. It comes from the word bodega, which is, you know, your cellar, your pantry, but with the O-N ending, it means it's something just larger. And it's essentially the typical still life kind of art that is developed in Europe at this moment in time, but with a Spanish twist. And Velázquez is going to become really the master of bodegon in many ways. He's one of the very first artists in Spain to properly develop still life during the Baroque period. So it's very important the way he does this. And well, the idea is that it is some kind of common scene everybody can relate to. And this one that he makes in here for the Water Cellar of Seville is quite peculiar because it's a bodegon, but with a portrait feature, which is why we have a very vertical painting, right? Well, what you see in here is essentially the man with the ragged sleeve, that is the water cellar. And he's filling, you know, the water to give a couple of men to drink. The one at the back that is almost faded is already drinking. The younger man is waiting or is being served actually as we speak. And what is beautiful already this early on about the art of Velázquez are the details. Look at the little water drops on the front jug that you have, you know, at the very sort of center of the painting. What about the little hairs that have already gone gray in this man's beard? Or the stains that we see actually in some of the different utensils that adorn this scene. And of course, the ultimate, most amazing thing, look at the transparency of that water. It actually looks like it is glass and water that is, portrayed in here, properly speaking. It's remarkable. And this is something that Velázquez is doing literally within a couple of years of becoming a master of his own right. Well, one of the reasons why this painting is very famous is because it has different versions, which I'm going to show you just now. But the one that you're looking at is, in my opinion, the best and definitely the most popular one, which actually we have it in London, in Astley House. And the other versions of the painting are just incoming. So this one is a slightly similar thing. The character at the back has been better preserved and the water cellar has a little hat. And the third one looks like a much more simple but intense kind of version of events. What we see in here is the higher use of tenebrism, which, remember, is that technique in which we use a very dark background to create contrast into our scene. What makes these paintings, in whichever version you choose of Velázquez, so realism is the very masterful work of chiaroscuro, which is that technique of Baroque where light and shadow is blend so that the colors move smoothly throughout the painting and the lighting looks almost photographic-like. And the other thing that is important about this painting is the other word in Spanish that I have written in here for you, which is costumbrismo. Costumbre in Spanish means a custom, a traditional way of doing things. And the movement of costumbrismo appears in Spain in Baroque times to essentially characterize and encapsulate the day-to-day activities of the ordinary world. And in many ways, we often say that Velázquez, even amongst his peers, is the master of costumbrismo, and you're gonna see why. Because he's able to bring commoners into stories that are relevant in so many different levels of engagement. Well, now that we are here with Velázquez and costumbrismo, and the three different options for this painting. Tell me later which one you like best. Let's move on to one of the many portraits of Philip IV in Velázquez's career. Oops, I literally clicked a bit too fast. Let me go one back. So Velázquez actually did many paintings for Philip IV, and it all starts a bit like this. Velázquez goes to Madrid just to fill in essentially for a quick painting with the king on August 16th of 1623. This is the first time the two of them meet, and the painting of Velázquez, of the king that Velázquez does, is done in literally one day. The king and his prime minister, the Count Duke of Olivares, are so impressed that command Velázquez to come from Seville permanently and stay in Madrid as part of the royal court. And Velázquez, of course, obliges. They actually paid him 300 ducats, which is an awful amount of time and money, to actually move from Seville to Madrid. And that is how the painting that you see on the screen now is done. The portrait of Philip IV in armor is probably one of the most realistic paintings of the king that we have in historical record, and it's one of the very first, if not the first, that Velázquez officially does as court painter, as in the employment of the King of Spain. So it's a very important moment in time for him because, of course, it's the beginning of his career, properly speaking. And it's a very interesting portrait for what Velázquez is going to do later on. As you see, it kind of has a sculptural sort of feel to it in terms of design, like one of the busts that we saw last week with Bernini. And we reckon that perhaps it was part of a larger painting that maybe we have lost. And we end up here mostly because of the influence of Antonio Mor, who was actually the Dutch portraitor painting for Philip II. So there is a lot of Dutch and Northern influence in this painting, which we can see in the hues that Velázquez uses for developing this image. But just so you can compare, the painting that he did in one day is this one, the one that I've just popped into the screen, in comparison to the first proper painting in armor. So, you know, we always say it's kind of interesting how Velázquez is not generous at all with the way he portrays people on his paintings. And that is because he's also a master of realism. Velázquez works with models, either live models or from points of reference. He doesn't beautify people if he doesn't have to. And he doesn't really care that this is the King of Spain. This is how Felipe IV actually looked like. And that was fine. So the quality of the artist is really what pushes him forward and gives him a spot at the court permanently. And that's pretty much where he's going to stay and do the majority of his work, which is the reason why the majority of all of these paintings are actually in El Museo del Prado. Well, let's talk about a very interesting painting for Velázquez, because this is a painting that he actually does as he's returning from Italy in 1630. This is an oil on canvas, and it is in the Museum of El Prado, of course. It measures 223 centimeters by 290. So, you know, we're talking of a painting that is nearly 3 meters in size. It's massive. And in many ways, it is a crucial moment in his career. Some of the colors that you see in here, though, are not exactly as Velázquez develops them, because unfortunately the painting has degraded a lot over time and the color balance is off in comparison to the original vision and what we originally had in here. And this is the Apollo in the Forge of Vulcan, or often just referred to as the Forge of Vulcan, in case that you may have heard it that other way. Now, this is not a direct commission. Velázquez creates this painting alongside with another one, which is Joseph's Bloody Coat, while he's in Italy still visiting Rome, because he's not forgotten. He's a courtier and a court painter for the King of Spain. He doesn't want to come back empty-handed, essentially. So he brings back these two sets of massive paintings with him, just to prove that he's actually been doing work and not, you know, slacking or just learning. It was important to provide evidence of his self-improvement, right? So What we see in here is a mythical painting, which is very common in Baroque, which is essentially the moment when the god Apollo, which is the figure with the laurel wreath and the nice golden robe, comes into the forge of Vulcan and tells him that essentially his wife, Aphrodite or Venus, is having an affair with the god of war, with the god of Mars or Ares. So as you see, Velazquez is captivating the very moment when the news are broken out. Look at everybody's with the mouth like, what? What did you just say? Vulcan himself has those eyes that are about to pop out, and the immediacy of the action. Look at how he's holding something with the tongue, and the hammer, which is not quite there yet, but is obviously the next thing that's happening, is that moment in the forge. Well, the concept that Velázquez is trying to sort of portray in here is the idea of fraud. And we think that is how he tries to use allegorically this, mythological painting to put some kind of concept, a spin on a concept. He entirely does this, from the purpose of his own perspective, since there is no commission. This is just a topic that he seems to want to explore. But what is very important for us in here, and where we notice the changes that Velázquez has suffered while in Italy, is all of the naked bodies. All of the torsos that we see in here are clearly indications that Velázquez has been and seen Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel. And the development of that muscle work in Vulcan is something very new for the art of Velázquez, and that is going to push his depiction of the human body even further. So the theme is fantastic. The way that he adds little bits and pieces so that you understand this is a forge is really obvious, because, different bits of metal and what have you not. And the way he sets the scene so that everybody understands the physical space is as important in terms of the narrative as the players in here. That's the beauty of Velázquez, how everything mingles together to provide, one unified story. Well, now we're going to look at an interesting painting of Velázquez, because you see, as a court painter, he doesn't actually often get the chance to do religious art. And that is, I don't know if a blessing in disguise or not. It's definitely something that people have noticed and criticized of him as time has gone on. Well, what we see in here is the Christ crucified, which is on a still pose, completely, stiff in terms of how he's standing, and almost as if he's standing there willingly, voluntarily, I mean, which is really, of course, a contradiction with what we see in his face, which is the absolute martyrdom and torture of Jesus Christ. Well, even the blood is covering not just the hands and part of the body, but of course is drenching from his hair. And we can really see that the emphasis here is on that kind of last moment before death. The very dark background of this painting pretty much creates a very obvious contrast between light, which is covering the whole body of Christ, the background, and the cross. And this is the use of chiaroscuro, of the lighting technique, to pretty much give us the idea that the Lord is rising from darkness into heaven. Well, is this Baroque though? We're not entirely sure. A lot of the way this is portrayed is unlike Velázquez in many ways, and it has a much more classical influence. Some people have maybe even, likened this to Raphael in some instances. Now, we know that Velázquez uses in here 100% classic techniques and iconography from the 17th century. And we know that this standard he probably learned from his master, from Francisco Pacheco. As a painter of the court, like I said, he didn't get many options or many instances to create religious art. So while, for example, other contemporaries like Murillo in Seville were creating, different versions of the Virgin left, right, and center, Velázquez was getting paid to paint important, wealthy people, not necessarily to do altarpieces or things like that. So there is a lot of criticism that this body of Jesus or this depiction is not as polished as it could be, and that partially comes from the fact that the only point or the main point of reference that Velázquez has for this is the work of his own master. And we can see that directly in the way the figure of Christ is represented, particularly on the feet. Notice how normally in Catholic depictions of Christ, it is 2 feet and a nail that goes through both of them, while here both feet are on the ground and the nail going through it, which is something that we know Francisco Pacheco was very known for and actually quite controversial because it went against some of the standards of the religious background of the Counter-Reformation in Spain and the way Catholicism should be portrayed and pushed forward. So it's a very interesting thing in that regards. But the other thing that this painting highlights is the fact that, as many art historians before me have suggested, Velázquez is a technical copyist, meaning it's not that he copies other people, but he copies from likeness. He works from reference, either from his eyes or from another image, normally with living subjects. For him to idealize the body of Christ and come up with a concept that way, it's a lot harder. And he's not an inventive person in that regards. He's not a creator. He's definitely someone who uses his eyes as a photographic impression of the world around him. And perhaps in this kind of more aesthetic, spiritual topics, he doesn't deliver. But I still think this is a very important painting. And in fact, it has been considered, because of the emotiveness of it, one of the best, at least Spanish depictions, of course, of the crucifixion, which is very powerful. Well, now that we are aware of the sort of few first years of Velázquez, we're going to move to a very important painting, which is actually my favorite painting. And this is the surrounding of Breda. And since we're on Breda already, I'm going to assume that we are actually quite into that moment of the tour, and I'm just gonna drop in the chat the ways that you can keep on supporting us here in World Virtual Tours through your donations via PayPal and Stripe. You also have in there the link for all of the upcoming tours, talks, and academies. Remember that we have one more week of this, same time next week, with the overall wrap-up of Baroque, and that we have English history this Thursday with the Tudors at 6:30. Well, this is the surrender of Breda, in Spanish also known as Las Lanzas, the lances, because of, well, obviously all the lances that you see in the painting, that one really is a no-brainer. Well, this is done in between 1634 and 1635. It's also an oil on canvas, also in the Museum of El Prado. And this is also huge. It's 307 centimeters by 367. So we're talking of 3 to 4 meters in terms of size. It's absolutely massive. And this was done to commemorate the Spanish victory over the Dutch at the town of Breda. Now, there are actually a lot of fiction in here for this historical painting, because Velázquez was not an eyewitness to this event, essentially. But he relies on prints and written accounts of the affair to actually promote this version of history. So it's not like he was, coming up with it on the spot to create the scene. Now, what Velázquez does in here very well is to highlight the benevolence of Spain in the surrendering of the Dutch. What do I mean by this? Well, the figure in the middle, which you see then in the left on the sort of zoom, that is the Spanish general Ambrosio de Espinola, considered one of the best Spanish generals at this moment in time. And we do know that when the town of Breda surrenders, it had been on very generous terms from the Spanish army. Breda was a little bit tricky. Spinola had taken some hits. The Dutch had taken some hits, and it just seemed unnecessary to keep on dragging things on and on and on. But magnanimous as it may have been, it is highly unlikely that Spinola stops Nassau, who is the person bringing the key in here, from kneeling. You see how he's kind of holding his shoulder like, oh no, don't worry, you don't need to kneel towards me. No way. No one is believing that. He most definitely surrendered in a much more ceremonial way as it was expecting of him. But Velázquez does this kindness because the painting is made in the context of 12 different sets of paintings that are done for the King of Spain, for Philip IV, to commemorate different victories in Spanish history, normally within his reign. So essentially what Velazquez is doing in here is using the grand language of historic painting, which he probably borrowed from Rubens or may have heard or at least understood in terms of diplomacy and politics from his friend while they were at the court of Spain together, and embellishes the story to also put the general Ambrogio in a much better light. And there is also a personal reason for that. Spinola and Velázquez were friends. They knew each other. In fact, we know that Spinola was with Velázquez in the trip that he does to Italy. So, if you see what I mean, my friend is the main character in the painting. We need to make a big display of Spanish military supremacy. What a better way than showing some kindness on some of our lesser colonies. It's beautiful narrative if you think about it in many ways. Well, by adapting the likeness of the military painting into a concept where, the politics almost transcended, Velázquez does something really remarkable, and we often say that this is perhaps one of the greatest military historic paintings in history of art. And it doesn't just end there and in the degree of detail that goes into painting all of these people. It's the fact that he actually distributes the painting in two halves. At the front, you have the peace exchange between the two sides, of the Dutch and then the Spanish. Notice how the Spanish are a lot more, by the way, on the right-hand side of the painting. And then in the background, you see there is the smoke from war, there is a landscape, and what have you not. Well, the landscape is necessary to give us depth of painting. Velázquez is very good in creating perspective and aerial perspective specifically. On top of that, what he's doing with this is making reference to a lot of the resources that he has used to make this painting, including maps. So it almost looks like the people who are signing the treaty in some ways are standing on the edge of a map where the action and where the story has actually happened. So it's very clever in the way it combines everything, and considering the monumental scale at which this is done, some of the human figures that you see in there almost look, well, without the almost, look as big as me, considering I'm just over a meter and a half. In the painting itself is honestly truly remarkable. And the fact that he engages with us by having different characters that look out of the painting into us, he's pulling us into the story, just like the great Baroque masters always do throughout this journey. Well, now let's move on to another painting of Velázquez, which is the very famous Rocabai Venus, or if you know it, in Spanish, La Venus del Espejo, the Venus of the mirror, because of the feature, of course, of the mirror that we have in here. Well, this one is actually interesting because we have it here in England, we have it in the National Gallery, and this was done between 1647 to 1651, and it's smaller than the surrender of Breda. It's about 122 centimeters by 177. And it's actually a very unorthodox painting. What we see in here is, well, essentially Venus reclining, right? That's how she's laying down. And this kind of composition, we think Velázquez actually learned from Venetian artists. This had been very familiar in Venetian art throughout the 16th and 17th century. But in contrast to those other paintings of Venus in similar, positions, what is striking about this painting is the simplicity of it all, and the fact that Venus is looking backwards from us into the mirror. Now, the fact that it's just the naked body plus the drapery literally just draws everything, not just into Venus herself, but the mirror, which is, at the end of the day, what matters in here. Now, this is actually the only surviving nude of Velázquez's career. And we reckon that in general, even if he would have done a few others that don't survive, it wouldn't have been very popular, because we actually know that the figure of the female nude in Spanish art was not very well seen. And actually, we have evidence to suggest that the Inquisition did persecute it to some extent in the 17th century under the grounds of common decency. at the end of the day, is part of the Counter-Reformation, right? So there you go. Well, the idea here is that we are not entirely sure where Velazquez gets his inspiration from. There are many theories, many sources, and we can be debating until tomorrow. But the one that makes more sense to me, and this is not just to say the other ones don't have validity, but given the background, this is the one that I think makes more sense, is we know that Velazquez was very familiar with Venetian art and particularly with the work of Tiziano, of Titian. So there is a painting that was in the Spanish collection at this moment in time by Tiziano, which is, well, essentially Venus and Adonis. And the Venus that is depicted in here has a lot of similarities to what we see here in the Rockabye Venus. So to me, it all kind of adds up together. But there are many, many different sources and ideas as to how he came up with this composition. And the interesting thing is, like I said, in the mirror. Supposedly, the mirror is put in here because the topic that we're exploring is Venus contemplating her naked body. Except from the point of view of physics, at the angle in which the mirror is, it's impossible for Venus to actually be looking at herself. And what the art seems to be doing is tricking us into thinking that Venus is actually looking at us, the public. And so, once again, we are sucked into the story, not just by the potential enticing or attractiveness of Venus, but by that direct contact that Velázquez, the artist, is actually doing with us as a passive viewer. We are no longer just uninterestingly looking into it. We are hooked into the story. Well, the importance of this painting transcends the beauty of it all, actually. This painting has been so popular and so glamorous that it actually has received 2 different attacks in history of art. The first one actually happens in 1914, and it was actually done by Mary Richardson, one of the suffragettes, who actually conducted the attack on the painting a day after Emmeline Pankhurst was actually arrested. And these are the evidence. She actually took a massive machete with her, and she just whacked the painting right there in the National Gallery. And well, as you can see, destroyed it, or well, not entirely destroyed it, but of course it required extensive repairs. And actually, believe it or not, just last year, the very same people who recently attacked Stonehenge here in the UK also damaged the protective glass that had been put on the Rockabye Venus, seeing how things had gone. The painting was not damaged, but the protective glass was completely smashed to pieces. Thankfully, the way they put the glass, the painting, and some resin in between stopped any potential shards from penetrating the canvas itself, and it just needed a replacement of the cover. But as you see, art is not just beautiful, it can also provoke people to take action. And it is the uniqueness of this painting that made it such a target, as we've had with many others in history, right? Well, now let me take you to a very interesting portrait, because you see, from women who get hacked into pieces to kings that don't look particularly handsome, here I bring you a slave depicted on portrait in the 17th century. Bet you weren't expecting that one. Well, this is the very famous portrait of Don Juan Pareja. And I say very famous portrait because actually it was acquired by the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York in 1971. And up until that moment in time, it had been in a private collection and only very, very well-educated connoisseurs knew anything about it. The very subject of it all has puzzled and interested people in the world of art and or history for hundreds of years, because what you see here is a depiction of Juan Pareja, who was actually the slave of African descent, in traditional Spanish language considered a Moor, and as you know, please, we are trying to get rid of this word. This should be referred to as a person of either Islamic or, in this case, African heritage, which is what they are. And yes, he actually worked, well, not worked because he was a slave, but he was one of Velázquez's assistants in his workshop. And this may seem shocking to you, But this was actually quite common at the time, particularly if slaves had artistic skill, which Juan Pareja did. In fact, Juan Pareja is going to go on to be an artist of his own right. One of the reasons why Juan Pareja gets involved very strongly in the art of Velazquez, and actually potentially one of the best copyists of Velazquez that we have, is because when he actually enters the service of his master, Velazquez realizes very soon that this man is talented. So he lets him prime canvases and grind pigment and whatnot because he can appreciate it. Spoiler alert, he will not be a slave his whole life. Velazquez actually freed him in 1654 and gave the man the ability to, do with his life as he pleased. But it was actually the long time and relationship that he has with Velazquez what will elevate his art as time moves on. In fact, we know that Velazquez had quite a strong relationship with this slave of his, that he actually took him on this journey to Italy that he did as well to, develop further his art, background and what have you not. So it's very interesting because this is actually considered the very first portrait of a person of, well, first of all, mixed race, because Pareja was actually identified as a mestizo, which essentially means mixed lineage or something along those lines, and someone of African descent, as we know Pareja actually has in history. So it's a very powerful thing that Velázquez does in here. Now, the idea behind this portrait, and it's one of those theories that I really struggle to believe. Many art historians have tried to debunk, but we're a little bit on the fence about it, is that he did this painting in preparation for the portrait of the Pope of Innocent X, which comes the year after. And I mean, it makes sense considering that in the previous decades, he had been working on slightly different stuff. So perhaps he wanted to go over the human body or the general shape of it all. But to us, it doesn't make a lot of sense because, of course, the Pope was a white old man, which Pareja was not. So we don't really see how he could actually be using this as preparatory work for the Pope himself. We reckon deep down, this must have had a different ambition, whether it was to actually do a dignified portrait of his slave and potentially more than slave, maybe friend or assistant or something else. And that also comes in the general shape of the painting. It's very strange, but for a slave, this man is actually depicted as a dignified sort of Lutheran Calvinist Dutchman. The color that we see in there was actually banned at the time of Philip IV. So Velázquez takes some, liberties in this painting, which are very interesting, and that makes us wonder, what was the point? What did he want to tell us with this painting? Well, we're approaching the last two paintings of the talk, and of course I had to speak about the Meninas. Now, I could talk about the Meninas for hours. We don't have hours, we have a few minutes. So apologies if I don't go in as much depth as you may want. Of course, as usual, if you have any questions at the end of the tour, do make sure to ask, but I'll try to be as brief as possible since there are books just written on this, right? Well, Las Meninas is a huge canvas. It's also 318 by 276 centimeters, which we have at the Museum of El Prado. You have the full length canvas on the right and then details that I'm gonna be putting on screen on the left. And this was done in 1556. Now, the Meninas literally means the ladies in waiting, which is what you see here. This is a depiction of the royal palace, of the royal court of Philip IV. In the center, the little girl is Margarita Teresa, who will later on become Holy Roman Empress, Archduchess of Austria, etc., etc. Around her, we have her ladies in waiting, chaperone, tutors, the little dog, a couple of dwarfs who were part of the royal entourage. We also see Velázquez in a very interesting, uncanny self-portrait, right there, the man with the cross. Then we see the farther portrait at the back in the mirror of what are her parents, Philip IV and Mariana de Austria, and at the back is the chamberlain of the queen. And on top of that, at the end of the painting, we see very faded away a couple of massive pieces of art that would have been in one of the royal rooms at the Alcázar in Madrid. So it's it's an incredible painting because it kind of adds everything that Velázquez is good at in one. This is a historical moment. This is a portrait, and not just a portrait of one person, it's a group portrait, which includes a self-portrait, which includes references to many different pieces of art throughout history. It's truly the zenith of his art and probably of Spanish art in many ways. Now, we know that this painting was actually damaged in a fire in the Alcázar, and it was restored in 1984. In fact, if any of you saw it in El Prado before the 90s, this was looking a lot more yellow than it does nowadays. And it shocks people because, well, the state of the painting has changed a lot over time. And what we see in here is an artist that has mastered the use of space. Everything that you see here is done on a grid to make sure that it's properly counterbalanced and that the dimensions are right. We have different perspectives from the ground and from the aerial because we have, the linear perspective here that it's done by making the box of the room with the ceiling, the doors, and everything else. And of course, what is super interesting is the way in which we are not entirely sure who the viewer is supposed to be. Is the mirror at the back a mirror, and are the parents of the little princess the ones who are actually looking into this? Is someone else looking in here? It's a bit of a mystery. The story is definitely, interesting, but Velázquez, of course, made the most of this freedom that he had to work with the King of Spain to create a masterpiece like very few others at this moment in time. Now, what surprises a lot of people is that the colors that are used in this masterpiece, like in the vast majority of Velázquez's work, are actually very ordinary. The Museum of El Prado has done an analysis of the pigment that you see here on the screen, and that includes quite ordinary things like carbon black, ochres, lead white, azurite, vermilion, and red lake. That's it. That's all of the tones that make this painting. But although Velázquez is always criticized for having a very limited palette, what he does splendidly, and you can see here very well, with those very few bits, and you can actually see it in the self-portrait, with those very few stains of paint, he's very good at mixing. And with the mix, he can obtain many different hues that actually bring very subtle but important color notes that, through his blending and through his use of chiaroscuro and the transition between light and shadow, bring these paintings to life in a degree of realism very hard to achieve by many other people. And that is how I'm gonna leave Las Meninas, because otherwise I can tell you the individual stories of every single painting, of every single individual portrait that we have in here. And we have one more painting to talk about, which is Las Hilanderas, the Spinners. This is probably the last major work that Velázquez ever did. This dates from 1557, just a couple of years before he dies. And it's also quite a big painting. It's 220 centimeters by 289, also in the Museum of El Prado. Essentially, most of Velázquez's collections becomes the foundation of the building of El Prado because of the sheer amount of work that he left behind. Well, traditionally, it was understood that this was a depiction of tapestry weavers at the workshop of Santa Isabel, until in 1948, an art historian known as Angula in Spanish actually realizes that the iconography of the painting is instead telling a Greek myth, which is the story of Arachne. And very briefly, the story of Arachne is this woman. She's a mortal. She's apparently a very good spinster. She's very good at making textiles. And she has the hubris of suggesting that she's better than the goddess Athena herself. So Athena, to try and teach a lesson to the woman, comes to Earth, who is the woman that is older here on the left that you see spinning, to have a competition with Arachne to see who's the better craftsman of them both. And Arachne is the woman here on the right. And because Arachne loses this match, Athena will actually transform her after she very tragically kills herself in a spider, which is where we get arachnids from. Well, what is remarkable about this painting is that Velázquez manages to mix common stuff with mythology all at once, because tapestry production is, of course, very important for the development of the Spanish arts and Baroque art in general. And what adds the depth into the story is the way he adds the Greek myth on top of something that happens very ordinarily in the lives of women all across Europe. What gives us a further sort of check of truth that this is indeed the Greek myth is the tapestry that you see at the back of the painting. This is actually a copy of The Rape of Europa by Tiziano that Velázquez does to give the painting more credibility. And what is remarkable about this painting, and I hope that you can realize, is that you can actually see that that wheel is spinning. How do you do that? How do you do that in art unless you have such a clever use of brush strokes and of optics to truly make someone believe that wheel is spinning and not still? And likewise with the way that the finger is going through the thread. It's incredible. The degree of realism is madness. And this is actually thanks to a kind of technique which is what we call the textural mode painting. This is something that Velázquez borrows and allegedly surpasses from Venetian painting, once again, from the 16th and 17th century, where essentially there are marks all throughout the painting of your art as an artist, of the paint, of the canvas, little bits and bobs. The paint is not always fully blended. Sometimes you see smudges of paint, a brush stroke that is very creative without having been finished. And that adds a certain degree of texture that adds realism to the painting because, well, at the end of the day, it's a tangential object that as humans, we can relate to. And that is how, in a very theatrical way, because in a way the canvas is creating almost like a backdrop for this scene, Velázquez creates this juxtaposition between the magic and the common, the little perfection and the imperfection that adds to perfection, the ordinary and the classical myth, in a way that very few other artists have ever been able to achieve. And that is the end of the talk for today, guys. So let me open up the chat just now. Excellent. Right, let's see. Oh, it's doing this again. Right. Let's do that. Ta-da-da-ta. Okay. So the chat is open. So there you go. You should be able to ask any questions that you may have just now. So please go ahead. And I'm just going to grab a very quick glass of water. But I hope that you have enjoyed that as much as I enjoy Velázquez, in case you couldn't tell. Right. Let's see. Right. Okay. Oh, thank you so much, guys. It's very kind of you. I'm very, very glad that you have enjoyed this. Like I said, Velázquez is one of the things that I definitely grew up with and shaped me in many ways. So I'm very happy and glad to be able to bring this together. The Christ one is familiar to you. Oh, I'm so glad that you actually knew that. And Angeles, indeed, you should be able to, just keep an eye out for the replay on World Virtual Tour's website on the Academy. But remember that it will only be up for a few more days. As if you joined a little bit late, for whatever reason, the YouTube link isn't working properly, it's not connecting. So unfortunately, this one hasn't gone onto the live stream. Our apologies for that. I am without... Thank you so much, Erin. I can't help myself, quite literally. It's honestly, it's when you grow up with these things and you are lucky enough to have teachers like I did and parents like I have that care about culture so much and allow you to actually explore this, tenfold, it really marks you. So I'm glad, but you shouldn't thank me. You should thank all of those people that came before me who truly allowed me to understand how wonderful art is and how much more there is to art that originally meets the eye. So thank you. My parents, who I'm talking with later, would be very, very pleased. Thank you so much, guys. Thank you so much for the lovely birthday wishes, by the way. Very, very kind of you all. It's, very, very kind. I'm very, very thankful for all of your, uh, support in that sense. And I've not seen, oh, wow, you hadn't seen Velazquez before, Linda? Wow, okay. You've made my day. Like, I can go to sleep happy today. I mean, I was gonna go to sleep happy anyway, because Velazquez. So if you see what I mean, but it actually makes me very happy that I've allowed you to discover something as wonderful as the art of the greatest Spanish master of all. And I don't say that lightly. I know we could say that about many people, but without Velázquez, there wouldn't have been a Dalí, there wouldn't have been a Picasso, there wouldn't have been a Goya, there wouldn't have been a lot of other people that came after him. Great. I'm just going to put the links in the chat in there, guys, for the upcoming tours and the ways that you can donate through PayPal and Stripe. Thank you so much. I'm just going to come in quickly to some more questions since we have a few more moments. So please let me just very quickly catch up with the chat. Thank you so much, everybody, for the very, very lovely messages. It's very, very kind of all of you. And right, let's see. I saw a question just here. I'm just scrolling through the thing. Velázquez, Las Meninas. What or who is he in the painting? He is the man with the cross. So if I go backwards, hang on, no, not that. Let me do that. He's this guy. He's the guy with the cross. We know that because Velázquez is awarded the cross to the order actually 3 years after the painting is done. So we know the cross must have been added afterwards as a way of, signifying him. And in terms of the little girl, yes, she is not obviously the person that is looking at this. She's entirely on the wrong place. But who or what is he painting? We are not entirely sure. It is a complete mystery. Could it be that he's actually painting the king and the queen, and that's what the background mirror is? Perhaps. And that maybe the little girl is posing to keep her parents entertained? Perhaps. Honestly, we are not sure. It's an absolute mystery in these regards. So your your ideas, Anne, are as good as everyone else's. So, I hope that encourages you to go on and do some more reading on Velázquez. And by the way, for those of you waiting for some recommendations for books, don't worry. Next week, I have a very thorough list of everything Baroque and all of these artists for you guys to enjoy. Thank you so much. And yes, Bernini was not always my favorite, as much as I can indeed appreciate his work, Kate. But I'm glad that you were also able to appreciate Velázquez. So thank you so much. Thanks, guys. It's honestly such an honor, such a pleasure having you here with me and getting you to enjoy something that is so special for us. And I bought them, Kate, in the wonderful town of Cuenca. If you go to Spain and you don't know where to go and you want to explore somewhere off the beaten path, go to Cuenca. It's a beautiful, quaint town in the middle of Castilla-La Mancha, about an hour's-ish drive from Madrid, and you will love it. And it has a beautiful cathedral as well. And several many museums of religious art, by the way. Thank you so much, guys. It's very, very kind. The Peace of Westphalia was, yes, so that is before. And yes, he was Catholic, most definitely Catholic. What was wrong with the crucifixion scene, Bandit Queen? Well, to me, there is nothing wrong with the crucifixion, but a lot of other art historians, which are perhaps a bit more purist in the way that art is done, decide that for Velázquez, the way that he, engages with realism and with the depiction of the human body is just not as realistic as it could be, because he's not working from a direct model. So that is apparently the issue, that it doesn't look as great as some of his other, explorations of the human body. One of those things. It's still considered one of the greatest crucifixions of all time, But, in comparison to some other of his paintings, a lot of people criticize it as not being as polished. And yet, what I genuinely think is that the point of this painting was never to be realistic or precise. It was to encapsulate that moment, of the crucifixion, which I think in terms of balancing the story and the background, he does very well. But that's just my opinion. A lot of people out there think otherwise. So, uh, one of uh, one of those. Who painted the portrait of Velazquez paintings? They are both self-portraits, Erin. They're both self-portraits. The one on the Meninas and the one on the beginning slide is also done by him. He doesn't do many, but it's also done by him. And I do enjoy Baroque music, Erin. In fact, those of you who may have attended my tour of Salisbury Cathedral would know that Salisbury was super important for developing Baroque music, at least from the point of view of organ in this country. And I love actually going there to listen to Baroque music because it's magnificent, formidable in that sense. And of course, who doesn't like, a little bit of Vivaldi and later on Bach? It's wonderful. Thanks so much, guys. It's very, very kind. And I think we're pretty much done in here. So let me just stop sharing the screen properly today. I will also drop in the chat now the ways one more time that you can help us, carrying on with the project through your donations via PayPal and Stripe here in World Virtual Tours. And on that note, if you are around on Thursday, I shall see you, for the third episode of England, which is Tudor history this time around. So join me for those conundrums between Catholicism, Anglicanism, and how many wives Henry ends up killing and how many survive him. And if not, if you're around next week, we are back with that wrap up on Baroque. So Angeles, Baroque will be, the fourth session of Baroque will be Monday next week, exactly at the same time, 7:30. And the Tudors is on Thursday at 6:30. And you have that in the, so I'll put it just one more time in here so you can have it at hand. The links with the tours have all of those sessions coming up. And you can always go to World Virtual Tours to the Academy session and look at the previous and upcoming sessions there. But the two classes next week are going to be the last academies I'm going to do until the autumn. So just so you know, we'll be back with regular tours throughout July and August, as well as September. I've already confirmed all of my dates. So I'll be seeing you very soon. Thank you so much for your amazing support. And I hope that you have a very lovely rest of your week. Take care. Bye-bye.